The clinking of champagne glasses filled the air, a sound I had come to associate with my sister's victories. This time it was for my sister Priya, the radiant center of her own engagement party. My father, a man who measured his worth by the shine of his children's accomplishments, stood to give a toast. He beamed at Priya and her new fiancé, Dr. Ben Carter, a surgeon whose success was now part of our family's portfolio. He spoke of their bright future, their perfect match, and the legacy they would build. It was all so predictable, so polished. Then, his eyes found me in the crowd. A practiced pitying smile played on his lips. "And let's not forget our Anya," he announced, his voice booming. "Quietly living her little life, making sure all the numbers are in the right boxes in her little government hobby job. We're proud of you too, sweetie." Laughter rippled through the guests, polite but sharp enough to feel like 1,000 tiny cuts. I just stood there, smiling back, the perfect unassuming daughter. But inside, the old ledger was opening. This joke wasn't new. It was just a public version of all the private dismissals. I saw the day he forgot my master's degree graduation, because it clashed with Priya's weekend trip to a vineyard. I heard his voice from a dozen introductions. "This is Priya, and this is our other one." Each memory was a line item of deliberate indifference, and the debt of their disrespect had just compounded. I kept my expression placid, a skill honed over a lifetime of such moments. After the applause died down, someone approached me. It was Dr. Ben Carter, the fiancé, a man who seemed genuinely kind despite the world he was marrying into. "That was a bit much," he said quietly, a flicker of apology in his eyes. "I've been meaning to ask, what is it you actually do? Your dad mentioned something about FinCEN once, but I've never known what that really is." His question was simple, direct, and utterly devoid of the condescension I had grown so used to. It was a genuine inquiry. He had no idea what he had just done. That one simple question, that single moment of sincere curiosity from a stranger, was the spark. It was the first time anyone from their glittering world had bothered to ask a real question, and I realized explaining was no longer an option. You can't explain a reality to people who are determined not to see it. You have to make them live it. To my family, I was Stanya. It was a nickname my sister Priya came up with, and it stuck. It stood for static, unchanging, and boring. I was the reliable, quiet background character in the dazzling movie of her life, a role my parents seemed more than happy for me to play. My world was small and gray in their eyes, while Priya's was a kaleidoscope of color and excitement. This narrative was never more clear than on Priya's 30th birthday, an extravagant affair held at a rooftop bar overlooking the city. My parents' gift was the grand finale of the evening. My father, with the air of a king bestowing a favor upon his chosen heir, presented Priya with an envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for the down payment on a luxury condo she'd been talking about for months. The crowd roared with approval. Later I gave Priya my own gift, a signed first-edition copy of her favorite author's first novel, something I had spent months tracking down through a network of rare book dealers. She glanced at it for a moment, offered a limp, "Oh, cool," and set it aside on a table, where it was quickly buried under discarded napkins. A moment later, my mother, a woman who confused monetary value with emotional worth, pulled me aside. She squeezed my arm, her smile tight with pity. "It's a lovely thought, dear," she whispered. "But you know, Priya, she appreciates things with value." The word hung in the air, a final judgment on my effort, my taste, my entire being. And as she said it, my internal ledger flipped open to another memory. The time I spent a full weekend untangling my dad's disastrous tax situation, saving him thousands of dollars. His thanks had been a quick pat on the head, followed a week later by him buying Priya a $2,000 designer watch with the money I'd saved him. Now, contrast that world of loud dismissal with the world where I actually lived my life. My hobby job was in a place my family couldn't even imagine, a sensitive compartmented information facility, or SCIF. It's a sterile, windowless vault deep inside a federal building, where the only sound is the quiet hum of servers and filtered air. In this world, I wasn't Stanya. I was Dr. Sharma, and I was one of the lead analysts for my boss, Director Evans, a man who didn't care about flashy gifts, only about actionable intelligence. I remember one particular briefing. I stood before a massive smart screen, displaying a complex web of international transactions. The cartel is exploiting a know-your-customer loophole in this specific Swiss bank, I explained, pointing to a note on the chart. They're using a series of shell corporations, but the ultimate beneficial owners all trace back to the same 3 individuals. They're in the placement phase, moving roughly 50 million a week, using high-frequency trades to layer the funds. My voice was calm, certain. I wasn't asking for approval, I was stating facts I had spent 600 hours verifying. Director Evans listened, his eyes fixed on the data I was presenting. He didn't interrupt. He didn't second-guess. When I was finished, he simply nodded. "Good work, Sharma," he said, his voice low and decisive. He turned to his aide. "Get me a direct line to the Treasury liaison and burn. Authorize a Level 1 asset freeze on all accounts connected to those UBOs, effective immediately." With those words, based solely on my analysis, millions of dollars in drug money were instantly paralyzed. In that silent, cold room, my work had consequences that rippled across the globe. That was my reality. Later that week, I was digging deeper into the cartel's methods, sifting through terabytes of seized data. I was tracing how they planned to legitimize the frozen funds once they managed to move them again. And that's when I saw it. The preferred method was real estate, specifically purchasing luxury condos in cash, slightly above market value, through anonymous LLCs. The properties they targeted were high-end glass-walled towers in burgeoning markets, unnervingly similar to the exact type of properties my sister Priya sold for a living. It was just a flicker then, a faint line of professional pattern recognition, a chilling coincidence. I went home from that engagement party with my father's dismissive laughter still ringing in my ears. But for the first time, it wasn't the insult that echoed in my mind. It was Ben's question. It was a simple, decent question from a man who knew nothing about me, and it changed my entire strategy. I realized I had been trying to win a game where my family set all the rules, a game designed for me to lose. The only way to win was to stop playing and force them to play mine instead. Back in the sterile silence of the skiff, I couldn't shake the professional unease. The cartel's use of luxury real estate as a money laundering vehicle. It felt too close, too familiar. It was a loose thread, and my job was to pull on loose threads. This wasn't about revenge, not yet. This was about due diligence. With a knot tightening in my stomach, I opened a secure, off-the-books analytical portal and began to run a search, something I had never done before. I cross-referenced recent sales from Sharma Lux Properties against our database of flagged shell corporations. It took less than a second. My screen, which was usually filled with foreign names and offshore entities, suddenly lit up with sales records from my sister's company. I saw the LLCs I had been tracking for months, fronts for the cartel, names I knew were steeped in violence and crime, listed as the buyers of 3 different multi-million-dollar condos. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't a coincidence. My sister wasn't just selling properties like the ones the cartel used. She was selling properties and tuned them. A wave of nausea hit me, but years of training kicked in, pushing the emotion down and replacing it with cold, hard procedure. I knew instantly that I couldn't touch this case. My involvement would taint the entire investigation, making it look like a personal vendetta and jeopardizing any potential prosecution. The only correct move, the only ethical move, was to follow protocol. My hands moved with detached precision as I began compiling a new intelligence brief, citing the sales, the shell corporations, and the direct link to the ongoing cartel investigation. I was meticulous. I didn't refer to Priya by name, only as the principal of Sharma Lux Properties. I built the case with irrefutable data points, a clean chain of evidence that any other analyst could follow. It was the most important report of my career, and it was also the most painful. I attached it to a formal request for recusal, citing a potential conflict of interest, and addressed it to Director Evans. I hit send, and the file was gone. I hadn't declared war, I had filed a report. My part in it was over. Months passed. Life went on, at least on the surface. My sister's wedding planning became the family's sole focus, a whirlwind of cake tastings and venue tours that I politely avoided. I kept my head down and focused on my other cases, the ones that had no connection to my family's gilded, fragile world. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, the first tremor hit. Federal marshals delivered subpoenas to my father's office and Priya's penthouse. They were summoned for a formal deposition regarding financial irregularities at Sharma Lux Properties. Their reaction was exactly what I expected: pure, unadulterated arrogance. They saw it as a bureaucratic annoyance, a mistake made by some government drone that they and their expensive lawyer would swat away. My mother called me that evening, her voice a shrill instrument of fury. She didn't ask if I knew anything, she accused me directly. "How could you do this, Anya?" she hissed. "You were always jealous of your sister's success, and now you sick the IRS on her right before her wedding? This is a new low, even for you." I listened to the tirade without saying a word, letting the familiar accusations wash over me. I wasn't the one who had done this to them. They had. I just filed the paperwork. The deposition was held in a sterile conference room in a downtown federal building, a place devoid of charm or comfort. On one side of a long polished table sat my sister, my father, and their lawyer, a man whose tailored suit seemed to shrink as the day wore on. On the other side sat the government's team, led by a woman named Miss Davies, an assistant U.S. attorney with a reputation for being surgically precise and completely unflappable. I was not there. My professional firewall had to be absolute. I had handed them the map, it was their job to follow it to its destination. Miss Davies began her questioning with a chilling calm. She didn't raise her voice. She simply presented facts. She laid out documents showing my sister's firm had accepted multiple all-cash offers from anonymous LLCs without performing the legally required due diligence. She produced falsified Know Your Customer forms and pointed to structured cash deposits designed to fly under the radar of federal reporting thresholds. My father blustered, claiming it was all standard practice. My sister lied with a confidence that began to fray at the edges, her voice growing tighter with each document Ms. Davies produced. Their lawyer kept objecting, his arguments growing weaker and more desperate each time. After nearly 2 hours, Priya finally snapped. She slammed her hand on the table, her face a mask of indignation. "This is insane. Who is even behind this?" she spat, looking at Ms. Davies with contempt. "Some jealous competitor we outbid? Some little IRS nobody with a grudge?" Ms. Davies paused, letting the outburst hang in the silent room. She looked directly at my sister, her expression unreadable. "Neither," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "This investigation was not initiated by the IRS. It began with an intelligence brief submitted by a senior analyst at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network." She slid a single document across the polished surface of the table. "It was the cover page of my report." My father and sister stared at it, confused. Their lawyer picked it up, his eyes scanning the formal text. His own face went pale as he read the bottom line aloud, his voice barely a whisper. "Case initiated and predicate analysis performed by Dr. Anya Sharma." That was the moment. That was the instant their entire world fractured. I imagined my father's face, the blood draining from it as he processed the name. My sister's look of raw, shattered disbelief. The name of the footnote, the hobbyist, the quiet failure they had mocked at parties, was now officially cited as the architect of their ruin. They had built their lives on a foundation of lies, and their invisible child had just handed the government the blueprints. Before they could even react, Miss Davies delivered the final, clinical blow. Dr. Sharma's analysis of the cartel's laundering methods was so meticulous, she was awarded a departmental citation for it last month, she stated, her voice leaving no room for argument. She recused herself the moment she identified a personal conflict to protect the integrity of the case. "The evidence against you is built entirely on your own actions, as uncovered by one of the top financial crimes analysts in the country, a mind you happen to disastrously underestimate." The fallout was swift and total. Once my father and Priya were indicted, their world of smoke and mirrors evaporated. Their story became a cautionary tale whispered at the country clubs they could no longer afford to be members of. Ben, my sister's fiancé, called off the wedding. He called me once, a short, respectful conversation. He simply said he couldn't marry into that level of deceit and wished me well. Their friends vanished. Their assets were frozen pending trial. The glittering empire they had built on arrogance and illusion crumbled into dust. In the quiet aftermath, my own world expanded. The successful prosecution of the cartel case, built on the foundation of my analysis, earned me a significant promotion. I was asked to lead my own special investigations unit. My new office wasn't in a basement skiff, it was on the 7th floor, and it had a large window that overlooked the city. It was a small thing, a pane of glass, but it felt like I could finally breathe. I was no longer defined by my family's suffocating narrative, but by the quiet, earned respect of my colleagues. My new team became my true family, a collection of brilliant, dedicated analysts who challenged and supported me. Our brainstorming sessions were vibrant exchanges of ideas, built on mutual respect and a shared mission. There were no golden children here, only professionals valued for their competence. It was in this new, healthier world that the last ghost of my old life appeared. A thick, cream-colored envelope arrived at my office. It was a handwritten letter from my mother. It was 10 pages of rambling, self-pitying prose. She blamed the cartel, the government, Priya's ambition, and my father's ego. She never once took responsibility for her own enabling behavior. Buried deep in the 7th page was the closest she could come to an apology, a single, hollow sentence. "I'm sorry you felt you had to do this to us." It wasn't an apology for her actions, it was an accusation against mine. It was perfect, in its own way. It was the most authentic thing she had ever said to me. I read the letter once, feeling not anger, but a kind of distant, clinical pity. Then, without folding it, I walked over to the heavy-duty office shredder. I fed the pages into the slot and listened as the machine whined, turning her last, desperate attempt to control the narrative into a basketful of meaningless confetti. My piece was finally my own. My father believed a legacy was something you pass down. I learned that a true legacy is something you build in silence, and have acknowledged by the world. If you've ever had to fight to be seen for who you really are, share your story in the comments. In this community, your true self is always valued.